Have you ever walked into your own home and realized everyone else believed you were already gone? I wish I could tell you that what happened to me was a misunderstanding. I wish I could say someone had the wrong address or that a contractor had mixed up two houses on the same street, but that wasn't what happened. The people inside my home knew exactly where they were, and the person leading them through every room was my own daughter. She had architects measuring walls, designers choosing paint colors, and contractors discussing which walls should come down first. They talked about my house as if it already belonged to someone else. What my daughter didn't know was that years earlier, I had quietly signed one legal document that would change everything: a life estate deed. By the time she discovered it, every assumption she'd made about my home and about me was about to collapse. My name is Margaret. I'm 74 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and I've lived in the same white two-story house in Ohio for almost 48 years. It's not a mansion. The kitchen cabinets are older than some marriages. The porch creaks in the winter. The maple tree in the front yard has roots that have cracked part of the sidewalk. But every inch of that house tells the story of my life. My late husband, Robert, and I bought it when we were 26 years old. We had almost nothing. We slept on a mattress on the floor for months because we couldn't afford bedroom furniture. We painted every room ourselves. We installed the shelves. We planted the roses. Every paycheck went toward making that little house feel like a home. We raised our daughter, Emily, inside those walls. The pencil marks showing her height were still on the hallway wall. The tiny scratch near the kitchen window came from the day she learned to ride her bicycle and lost control. The old oak dining table still had a faint burn mark from Thanksgiving in 1989 when Robert accidentally set down a hot casserole without a trivet. Some people see an old house. I see birthdays, Christmas mornings, school projects spread across the dining room, quiet evenings with my husband after Emily had gone to bed. When Robert died 8 years ago, that house became even more important to me. Every room still carried his memory. The workshop in the garage still smelled faintly of cedar. His reading chair still sat beside the living room window. Some friends suggested I sell the house and move into a retirement community. Emily mentioned it too, more than once. She always framed it as concern. "Mom, that house is getting too big for one person. You'd have people around you. It would be easier." I smiled every time and gave her the same answer: "I'm not ready." What I didn't realize was that Emily had stopped hearing those words. She had started hearing something completely different. Eventually, Mom will leave. Eventually, the house will be mine. Eventually, I can do whatever I want with it. That eventually became more real to her than the fact that I was still alive. The morning everything changed began like any other Tuesday. I drove to the grocery store just after 9. I bought fresh bread, apples, chicken soup, and a bouquet of yellow daisies because they reminded me of Robert. I stopped at the library. Then I picked up birdseed from the hardware store. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. As I turned onto Maple Street around noon, I noticed 2 black SUVs parked in front of my house. At first, I assumed they belonged to neighbors. Then I noticed the back doors were open. Large rolls of blueprints leaned against one vehicle. A man wearing a hard hat walked across my lawn carrying a laser measuring device. I slowed my car. My stomach tightened. Had someone made a mistake? I parked in my driveway. The front door was wide open. Inside, voices echoed through the hallway. Someone laughed. Another person called out measurements. 32 feet. That wall can definitely come out. We'll open this entire space. Open this space? What space? I stepped onto my porch. The screen door was already propped open. As soon as I entered, I froze. 5 strangers stood inside my living room. One woman photographed the fireplace. Another person measured the ceiling. A contractor pointed toward my dining room. "If we remove this load-bearing wall, we'll need structural reinforcement." Remove the wall? I looked at the family photographs hanging there. Pictures of birthdays, graduations, Robert holding Emily as a baby. No one seemed to notice me. They walked through my house like tourists exploring a museum. Then I heard my daughter's voice. "No, I definitely want a larger kitchen island. We entertain a lot." I slowly turned toward the kitchen. Emily stood there holding rolled-up architectural drawings. She looked confident, professional. completely comfortable. She wasn't asking permission, she was giving instructions. One of the architects smiled. "We can modernize the entire first floor." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "The house has good bones, it just needs updating." The house, not Mom's house, not Margaret's home, just the house. I stood there for several seconds before finally speaking. "Emily?" Every conversation stopped. Heads turned. The room fell completely silent. For just a moment, my daughter looked startled. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Oh, Mom, you're home already." "Already?" As though I were interrupting an appointment. I looked around at the strangers. Would someone explain why there are people measuring my house? Emily walked toward me with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed everything was perfectly normal. "I wanted to surprise you." "A surprise?" "Yes, I've been planning renovations." I blinked. "Renovations?" She nodded. "The house needs updating." I looked past her. "They're talking about removing walls." "They're only making suggestions." "For whose house?" She sighed as though I were being unnecessarily difficult. "Our house." "No, not our house. My house. The home your father and I spent nearly 5 decades paying for. The place where every mortgage payment came from overtime, budgeting, sacrifice, and patience." I kept my voice calm. "You never asked me." Emily crossed her arms. "I didn't think you'd understand." One architect quietly looked down at his clipboard. Another pretended to review measurements. Even they seemed uncomfortable. "I don't understand," I said carefully, "because no one has explained why this is happening." Emily glanced toward the kitchen. "We're making improvements before prices go up again." "We?" She hesitated. "My family." That answer hurt more than I expected. Apparently, I was no longer included in the definition of family inside my own home. She walked toward the kitchen window. "I'm thinking quartz countertops here." The designer nodded. "And hardwood throughout." Someone measured the staircase. Someone else discussed replacing the fireplace. Each sentence felt like another piece of my life being erased. Then Emily said the words I'll never forget. "Eventually this will all be mine anyway." The room became quiet again. Not because anyone agreed, because everyone suddenly realized they had witnessed something deeply personal. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. There wasn't hatred there. There wasn't even anger. There was certainty. She genuinely believed she already had the right to decide my future. And that frightened me far more than if she'd simply been trying to hurt me. Because certainty is much harder to argue with than cruelty. I took a slow breath. Then I asked one simple question. "Emily, who told you that?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Who told you this house belongs to you while I'm still alive?" She laughed softly. "Mom, that's just how inheritance works." Several people exchanged nervous glances. One contractor quietly closed his notebook. The architect standing near the staircase shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to be standing in the middle of a family argument. I could have shouted. I could have demanded everyone leave. Instead, I simply looked around the house Robert and I had built together. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy, because for the first time that afternoon, I realized something my daughter didn't. She believed she knew everything about that house. She didn't. There was one decision her father and I had made years ago. One conversation we never shared. One legal document safely recorded at the county courthouse. And before this week was over, every person standing inside my living room would learn exactly what a life estate deed really meant. That afternoon, after the architects and contractors finally left, the house felt strangely quiet. The silence should have brought me peace, but instead it carried the weight of everything that had just happened. I stood in the living room and slowly looked around. Nothing had been moved yet. The family photographs were still on the mantel. Robert's favorite chair still sat beside the window. The faded quilt my mother had sewn nearly 40 years earlier was folded neatly across the couch. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow nothing felt the same anymore. For the first time since Robert died, I didn't feel completely safe inside my own home. Not because strangers had walked through it, because my own daughter had invited them. I made myself a cup of tea, though my hands trembled enough that I spilled a little on the counter. I sat by the kitchen window, watching birds gather around the feeder Robert had built. Normally, watching them always calmed me. Not that day. My mind kept replaying Emily's words. Eventually, this will all be mine anyway. She hadn't sounded cruel. She hadn't sounded guilty. She had sounded absolutely convinced. That realization hurt more than anything else. Somewhere along the way, my daughter had stopped seeing me as the owner of this home. She had started seeing me as an obstacle standing between her and an inheritance. I thought back to the little girl she used to be. Emily had loved helping her father in the garden. Every spring, she'd insist on planting one sunflower just for herself. She used to race through the hallway wearing socks, sliding across the hardwood floor until Robert pretended to chase her. On rainy afternoons, we'd bake chocolate chip cookies together. She would always steal one before they had cooled. Those memories didn't belong in photo albums. They lived inside these walls. Every room carried a piece of her childhood, which made today's betrayal even harder to understand. When had everything changed? It hadn't happened overnight. Looking back, the signs had been there. About 3 years earlier, Emily had begun asking questions that felt harmless at first. Mom, do you still have the original deed? Have you updated your will? Have you thought about putting the house in my name to avoid probate? I assumed she was simply trying to help. Estate planning isn't an easy topic. People my age are supposed to think about those things. I answered politely without giving many details. Whenever she asked whether I'd spoken to an attorney, I'd smile and say, "Everything is taken care of." She never asked what that actually meant. She simply assumed it meant what she wanted it to mean. A few weeks after those conversations started, Emily and her husband Jason invited me to dinner. It was pleasant enough. The grandchildren were running around the backyard. Jason grilled hamburgers while Emily talked excitedly about the housing market. "You wouldn't believe what homes in your neighborhood are selling for now," she said. I smiled. "I've noticed. You could make a fortune if you sold." "I don't want a fortune." She laughed. "You say that now. I mean it." She exchanged a quick glance with Jason. It lasted only a second. At the time, I barely noticed. Now I understood exactly what that look meant. Later that evening, after the children had gone inside, Jason sat beside me on the patio. "That house is probably worth close to $700,000 now, I suppose. You've done well." It wasn't luck. He nodded politely. "No, of course not." Then he added something that stayed with me. "Properties like yours don't stay in families very often anymore." At the time, I thought he was making conversation. Now I realized he had been thinking far beyond conversation. Emily wasn't dreaming about memories. She was thinking about equity. She wasn't imagining Christmas mornings. She was imagining resale value. She wasn't planning a family home. She was planning an investment. That evening, after the architects left, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Linda. "Margaret, are you all right?" "I will be. I saw all those people." "So did I." There was a long pause. "I didn't want to interfere." "You don't have to apologize." She hesitated. "I overheard something." "What?" "One of the contractors asked your daughter whether the homeowner had approved everything." I listened carefully. "What did Emily say?" Linda sighed. "She said, 'It's basically my house already.'" I closed my eyes. Hearing those words from someone else somehow made them even more painful. Linda continued, "That didn't sit right with me. It shouldn't. Are you going to do something?" I looked around my kitchen. The late afternoon sun was shining through the window, just as it had thousands of times before. On the refrigerator hung a faded drawing Emily had made in 2nd grade. Across the top, she'd written in crooked little letters, "I love my mom." For a moment, tears filled my eyes. How does someone go from drawing hearts for their mother to remodeling her house before she's gone? I still didn't know, but I knew one thing. This wasn't really about countertops, or paint colors, or open floor plans. It was about respect, and somewhere along the way, respect had quietly disappeared. After hanging up with Linda, I walked upstairs. The master bedroom looked exactly as Robert had left it. His old wristwatch rested inside the dresser drawer. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. Sometimes I thought about putting them away. I never could. They reminded me that love doesn't disappear just because someone does. As I stood there, I remembered another conversation, one that had taken place years before Robert passed away. We had attended the funeral of one of his closest friends. Afterward, several family members argued in the church parking lot about the man's property. They weren't grieving, they were negotiating. Robert drove home in complete silence. That evening, he looked at me across the dinner table and said quietly, "I never want our family fighting over this house." Neither did I. A few weeks later, we made an appointment with an estate attorney. It wasn't because we expected trouble. It was because we'd seen what assumptions and poor planning could do to families. The attorney explained several options. Robert listened carefully. He asked thoughtful questions. Before we left, he squeezed my hand and smiled. "Now we'll know you're protected." Protected. At the time, that word sounded almost unnecessary. Today, it echoed in my mind with a completely different meaning. Downstairs, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Emily. I stared at the screen before answering. "Hello? Mom, I think today got a little emotional." "A little? I just want you to trust me. I've always wanted to trust you." She paused. "The renovations will increase the value." "I didn't ask for renovations. You'll thank me later." "No, Emily." Another pause. "You don't understand." I spoke calmly. "No, I understand much more than you think." She sounded frustrated. "Can we just move forward?" I looked out the window toward the front porch Robert had built with his own hands. "I think," I said quietly, "before anyone moves forward, there are some things you need to learn." "What things?" I almost smiled. "The kind your father and I handled years ago." "What does that mean?" "It means we'll talk soon." Before she could ask another question, I gently ended the call. Then I walked into my study, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and looked at a neatly organized folder. I didn't take anything out. Not yet. Instead, I placed my hand on it for just a moment. Everything Emily believed about that house rested on assumptions. Everything Robert and I believed rested on preparation. And very soon, those two worlds were going to collide. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For years, mornings had been my favorite part of the day. The neighborhood was quiet. The coffee tasted better, and the first light through the kitchen window always reminded me that every day offered a chance to begin again. That morning felt different. I poured a cup of coffee and carried it to the back porch. The garden Robert and I had planted decades earlier was covered in dew. The roses needed trimming, and the tomato plants were beginning to lean against their stakes. Simple chores had always grounded me. Today, they reminded me why I had worked so hard to keep this home. Around 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone and called the attorney who had helped Robert and me with our estate planning years earlier. He had retired, but his practice had been taken over by another attorney who already had our file. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins," the receptionist said warmly. "How can we help you?" "I think it's time to review my documents. We can see you this afternoon." "I'll be there." At exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the law office carrying nothing but my purse. The waiting room hadn't changed much over the years. The same polished wooden chairs, the same framed landscape paintings. Even the faint smell of old books and fresh coffee seemed familiar. A young attorney named Daniel Harper greeted me with a kind smile. "I've reviewed your file before meeting with you," he said after we sat down. "Everything appears to be exactly as you and your husband intended." "I was hoping you'd say that." He folded his hands across the desk. "Has something happened?" For the next 20 minutes, I told him everything. The architects, the contractors, Emily's confidence, the renovation plans, her belief that the house was already hers. When I finished, Daniel remained silent for a moment. Finally, he nodded. "I'm glad you came before anything irreversible happened." "So am I." He opened a thick folder and carefully removed several documents. "This is the recorded life estate deed your husband and you executed years ago." Seeing Robert's signature again caught me off guard. Even after all these years, it felt as though he were still looking out for me. Daniel continued, "As long as you are alive, you remain the life tenant. That means you control the property during your lifetime. Major decisions involving the home require your legal authority." "So my daughter can't simply renovate it?" "Not without your permission." "What if she hires contractors anyway?" "They would be proceeding without authorization." I slowly exhaled, not because I wanted Emily to be wrong, because I finally knew with certainty that Robert's careful planning had accomplished exactly what he'd hoped. It had protected me. Daniel slid another paper across the desk. I recommend we send a formal notice to your daughter explaining the legal situation before any additional work begins. I looked at the document. For a long moment, I didn't pick up the pen. This wasn't how I imagined settling a disagreement with my only child, but neither had I imagined coming home to strangers planning to tear apart my house while I was still living in it. I picked up the pen. Let's make sure everyone understands the facts. As I signed the authorization, I silently thanked Robert. Years ago, we'd made one difficult conversation a priority. Now that conversation was about to spare me from a much bigger battle. The certified letter was mailed the following morning. I wasn't trying to embarrass Emily. I wasn't trying to punish her. I simply wanted the truth to arrive before another contractor did. For 2 days, the house was peaceful again. I watered the flowers. I finished the mystery novel that had been sitting on my nightstand for weeks. I even baked banana bread for Linda next door. Life almost felt normal. Then, on Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Mrs. Collins? Yes. My name is Michael Foster. I'm the lead architect working on I believed I was working on your home. His hesitation told me everything. How can I help you, Mr. Foster? I received a call from your attorney this morning. I expected you might. There was a brief silence. I wanted to apologize personally. For what? I should have confirmed ownership before accepting the project. His honesty surprised me. We relied on information provided by your daughter. She presented herself as the future owner and explained that the renovations had your full support. They do not. I understand that now. His voice became more serious. Until ownership and authorization are completely clear, our firm has suspended all planning. Thank you for letting me know. I truly am sorry, Mrs. Collins. So am I. After hanging up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Professionals were cleaning up a misunderstanding that never should have existed. A few hours later, another call came. This time, it was the general contractor. Mrs. Collins, I'm calling to verify something. What would you like to verify? Do you authorize any demolition or remodeling at your residence? I do not. I appreciate the clarification. Has work already been scheduled? It was. And now? It's been placed on hold. I thanked him and ended the call. By sunset, it became clear that word was spreading quickly through everyone involved in the project. The assumptions were beginning to unravel. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Emily stood on my front porch. She wasn't smiling this time. The confidence I'd seen earlier in the week had been replaced by frustration. As soon as I opened the door, she held up the attorney's letter. What is this? A letter explaining the legal situation. You hired a lawyer against me. I asked an attorney to explain the facts. You made me look foolish. I looked at her quietly. No, Emily. She folded her arms. The architect canceled everything. I know. The contractor won't return my calls. I know. They're acting like I lied. I chose my words carefully. Did you tell them you owned the house? She hesitated. I told them it would eventually be mine. Eventually and today are not the same thing. Her expression hardened. I was only trying to improve it. Were you improving it for me? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since this began, she couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. The renovations weren't being planned around what I wanted. They were being planned around the life she imagined living after I was gone. The silence between us lasted several long seconds. Finally, she spoke in a much quieter voice. So, what exactly is this life estate thing? I stepped aside and opened the front door a little wider. If you're willing to listen, I am. Then come inside. She walked into the same living room where, only days earlier, she had confidently directed architects from one wall to another. Now there were no blueprints, no measuring tapes, no strangers, just a mother and a daughter who was finally ready to hear the conversation she should have asked for years ago. I placed a folder on the coffee table. Inside were documents Robert and I had signed together years before. Emily looked at the signatures. One belonged to me. The other belonged to her father. She gently touched his name with her fingertips. For the first time since all of this began, I saw uncertainty replace certainty, and I knew that before this conversation was over, she would finally understand that this house had never been protected by luck. It had been protected by love, foresight, and one decision her father and I had made together many years earlier. Emily sat quietly on the sofa, the folder resting unopened on her lap. For the first time in days, neither of us felt the need to fill the silence. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder than usual. Robert had repaired that clock 3 different times over the years. He used to joke that as long as it kept ticking, the house was still alive. I wondered what he would think if he could see us now. Finally, Emily looked up. "I honestly didn't know." "I believe you." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You do?" "I believe you didn't know about these documents." I paused. "But not knowing isn't the same as asking." She lowered her eyes. "I guess I assumed." "Yes," I said gently. "You assumed." I opened the folder and carefully removed a certified copy of the deed. "Your father and I met with an estate attorney after Uncle Frank's funeral." Emily frowned. "I barely remember that." "You were busy with work and the children. But your father couldn't stop talking about what happened after the service." She nodded slowly. "The arguments?" "The arguments," I repeated. His friend's children weren't grieving. They were fighting over who would get what. Emily remained silent. "Your father drove home and said something I'll never forget." I smiled sadly. He said, "I don't want our home to become the reason our family falls apart." A tear rolled slowly down Emily's cheek. "I miss him." "So do I." I slid the document across the coffee table. The attorney explained several ways to protect the home while making sure our wishes would eventually be honored. Emily studied the first page. "The life estate deed gave me the legal right to live here, make decisions about the property, and remain in control for the rest of my life." She continued reading. "And after my lifetime, ownership transfers according to the deed." She looked up. "So eventually is not today." She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I understand that now." I wasn't interested in proving I was right. I wanted her to understand why Robert and I had made that decision. "We weren't trying to keep anything from you." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because we never imagined we'd need to." She stared quietly at the papers. "I thought you didn't trust me." I shook my head. This wasn't about trust. It wasn't? No. I leaned back in my chair. It was about certainty. She looked confused. "People change, Emily." "Mom, listen to me. My friends changed after losing spouses. Families changed after money entered the conversation. Even good people can make poor decisions when they believe they're protecting their future." She didn't interrupt. "So your father and I made our decisions while we were healthy, clear-minded, and together." I pointed toward the framed photograph on the mantel. "That was one of the last major decisions we ever made as husband and wife." Emily followed my gaze to the photograph. Her father stood beside me on the front porch, both of us smiling after repainting the shutters one summer afternoon. "I remember taking that picture," she whispered. "You were 16. "I thought you two would live here forever." I smiled. So did we. The sadness in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. After another few moments, Emily took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." "You do?" "I treated your home like it was already mine." "Yes." "I never stopped to think about what it still meant to you." I folded my hands. "It isn't just a house." "I know." "No." I looked directly into her eyes. "I don't think you did." I stood and walked toward the hallway. "Come with me." She followed. I stopped beside the pencil marks on the wall. Rows of dates stretched upward, each one recording another birthday. There was Emily at age 6, age 8, age 11, age 15. "You begged me not to paint over these." A faint smile crossed her face. "I remember. You said one day you'd bring your own children here so they could see how small you used to be." She gently ran her fingers across the faded markings. "I forgot about these." I never did. We walked into the kitchen. I pointed to the worn spot near the sink. That's where your father stood every morning making coffee. Then into the dining room. The scratch in the floor came from the Christmas your new puppy slid across the room chasing wrapping paper. She laughed softly through her tears. I blamed the dog. You blamed your cousin. She smiled for the first time in days. Then we stepped into the garage. Robert's workbench stood exactly where he'd left it. His old toolbox was still neatly organized. Emily rested her hand on the edge of the bench. He taught me how to use a hammer right here. Yes. I haven't thought about that in years. I waited. Then I said the one thing I'd been carrying in my heart since Tuesday. When you brought those architects into this house, they weren't just measuring walls. She looked at me. They were measuring memories. Her shoulders sank. I never saw it that way. I know. And that's what hurt the most. She covered her face with both hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the wind stirred the maple tree in the front yard. Inside, the house stood exactly as it always had, quiet, patient, and filled with the history of a family that still had a chance to heal. Neither of us realized that another challenge was already beginning. The renovation plans might have stopped, but the financial commitments Emily had already made hadn't disappeared. And before the week was over, those commitments would force both of us to make one final, life-changing decision. The following Monday, Emily called before I had even finished breakfast. Her voice sounded exhausted. Mom, can I come over? You don't have to ask. I think I need your advice. That was something I hadn't heard from her in a very long time. An hour later, she walked through the front door carrying a folder nearly as thick as the one I'd shown her. She looked different. Not older, just humbled. She placed the folder on the dining room table and slowly opened it. Inside were contracts, design sketches, financing estimates, and invoices. I made a mess. I quietly looked through the paperwork. The architect had required a design retainer. The contractor had scheduled labor. A custom cabinet company had already begun preparing an order. There were cancellation clauses I could see without even reading every page. You signed all of this? I asked. Emily nodded. I thought I was planning ahead. Did Jason see these? He encouraged them. And now? She sighed deeply. Now he's angry that everything has fallen apart. I closed the folder. This isn't really about the money, is it? She hesitated before answering. No. What is it about? For a long moment, she stared at the old oak dining table. Finally, she whispered, I'm scared. Scared of what? She took a shaky breath. Everything feels expensive now. The kids are getting older. College isn't far away. Jason's business hasn't done as well as we'd hoped. She wiped away a tear. I kept looking at this house as the one thing that would make everything easier. I listened without interrupting. I convinced myself that if I planned early, I'd be protecting my family. She looked at me with watery eyes. I never realized I was hurting mine. Her honesty softened something inside me, not because it erased what had happened, but because it finally explained it. Fear had quietly turned into entitlement. Entitlement had turned into assumptions, and assumptions had nearly destroyed our relationship. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. Emily. She looked up. Your father spent 40 years teaching me something. What's that? When people are afraid, they often start making decisions based on tomorrow instead of today. She frowned thoughtfully. He used to say that tomorrow isn't promised, but today is a gift. I smiled. And he was right. She squeezed my hand. I wish I'd remembered that. So do I. Later that afternoon, Jason arrived. He looked uncomfortable before he even stepped inside. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," he admitted. "I appreciate that you came." He nodded respectfully. "I owe you an apology too." We sat together in the living room. Jason looked around the house, noticing details he had probably overlooked before: the family photographs, Robert's books, the old piano. "I only saw property value," he said quietly. "I never saw a lifetime." I appreciated his honesty. "I should have stopped Emily." "You could have." "I thought we were helping." "No," I answered gently. "You were planning." He lowered his head. "And there's a difference." "There is." Jason took a folded piece of paper from his jacket. "I've already contacted every company involved." I unfolded it. Each contract had been formally canceled. Every remaining balance had either been paid or negotiated. "I wanted you to know that no one will ever come here again without your invitation." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the weight on my shoulders begin to lift. Not because the paperwork was finished, because respect had returned. That evening, Emily and Jason stood on the front porch preparing to leave. Before getting into the car, Emily turned back. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Would you let the kids spend next weekend here?" I smiled. "I'd love that. They've been asking to bake cookies with Grandma again." I laughed softly. "Then we'd better buy chocolate chips." She smiled through tears. "Just like when I was little." "Exactly like when you were little." She walked down the steps, then suddenly stopped. One more time, she turned toward the house. Not to judge it, not to redesign it, simply to look at it. Really look at it. The peeling paint on the porch railing, the wind chime Robert had made from old silverware, the maple tree shading the front yard. For the first time in years, she wasn't seeing a future inheritance. She was seeing her childhood. And that changed everything. The following Saturday, the kitchen was filled with laughter. My two grandchildren covered the counter with flour while Emily pretended to scold them for stealing cookie dough. I caught her smiling at the old pencil marks in the hallway. This time, she didn't suggest painting over them. Instead, she showed them to her children. "See these?" she said. "Those are Grandma's record of how I grew up." My grandson looked at the marks with wide eyes. "Can you measure me too?" I laughed. "I think we can make room for one more name." As I carefully wrote the date beside his height, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began: peace. Not because the legal documents had protected my home. They had, but because they had also protected something far more valuable. They had given my family enough time to remember that love is never measured in square footage, and that a home's greatest value isn't what it could sell for someday. It's the people who are fortunate enough to fill it with memories while they still can. Looking back now, I don't think the life estate deed saved my house. I think it saved my family. And if my story encourages even one family to have honest conversations before assumptions replace communication, then perhaps everything we went through served a purpose after all. 6 months later, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The house looked almost exactly as it always had. The white paint on the porch had been touched up. A few loose boards had been repaired. The roof had been inspected before winter. Nothing flashy, nothing unnecessary. Just the kind of maintenance Robert and I would have approved. One Saturday afternoon, Emily arrived carrying a small box. "I found these while cleaning the attic," she said. Inside were old family photographs, letters Robert had written to me while we were dating, and a faded notebook. I smiled as I opened it. Robert's handwriting filled every page. Plans for the garden, home repair ideas, family vacation budgets, and on the last page, a single sentence written in blue ink. A house should never be worth more than the people living inside it. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, Emily whispered, "Dad understood what I forgot." I closed the notebook carefully. "He always believed money should serve the family, not replace it." She nodded. "I've been thinking a lot these past few months. So have I. I've updated my own estate plan." That surprised me. "You have?" "Yes. I don't ever want my children to make assumptions the way I did." I smiled. "They'll thank you someday, even if they don't realize it." A few weeks later, Emily invited me to dinner. After the meal, she gathered the children in the living room. "I want you both to remember something," she told them. "Grandma's house isn't special because it's old." The children looked at her curiously. "It's special because this family was built here." My granddaughter looked at me. "Can we keep coming here forever?" I laughed softly. "As long as I'm here, the cookie jar will always be full." Everyone laughed. It wasn't a perfect family. No family is. But we had learned something that many people never do. Inheritance is more than receiving property. It's receiving values, respect, memories, responsibility. The life estate deed protected my legal rights, but forgiveness protected our hearts. Today, when I sit on the front porch with a cup of coffee and watch my grandchildren play beneath the old maple tree, I don't think about court records or legal documents anymore. I think about Robert. I think about the life we built, one paycheck, one repaired fence, one family dinner, and one ordinary day at a time. And I realized the greatest legacy we ever left wasn't written on a deed filed at the county courthouse. It was written in the people who finally learned that love should always come before inheritance. If this story carries a lesson, it's a simple one. Never treat someone like they're already gone while they're still here to love. Because a home can always be rebuilt. A relationship is much harder to restore.